Hello everyone, and thank you for joining me. Today, we are returning to Fallout 76, where we'll spend another 1000 scrip on 3-star ranged legendary weapons, and as always, I'll take a few moments to talk about what makes each one good, bad, or indifferent. And remember, if you enjoy content like this, please be sure to like, subscribe, and comment. It really helps the channel out, and it doesn't cost you anything. So let's go on ahead and get started and see what we get today. For our first roll, we get a Suppressor's Short Combat Rifle with bashing damage increased by 50% and 15% faster reload. So the Suppressor's effect it does what it says on the box. You know, it's a decent enough effect. Unfortunately, in Fallout 76, there's just not really that many situations where reducing the damage output from your enemies is all that important. The one place where I could see some potential use for that is the Decryption Daily Ops, and the combat rifle is actually a weapon that a commando or rifleman build could make some use of in that Daily Ops. It's suppressible and all that, so this could actually be a little bit more interesting than typical, but really that's about the only use case I can think of currently for that effect in the game. Maybe at some point in the future there will be more useful effects for useful times for the suppressor's effect, but as of right now it just only seems to have that one possible chance to shine. The second effect, the bashing damage increased by 50%, well, that is pretty much worthless. It's good on a minigun with a shredder mod, but in pretty much every other situation it's largely like not having a second legendary effect at all. So that is kind of a bummer on here. The 15% faster reload, that's great on any weapon because increasing your reload speed is just going to increase your DPS, and you might not get as much utility out of this as you would in some, but at the same time, when you're doing those tactical reloads that I talk about in my previous videos, if you've seen any of those, where, you know, you fight, kill things, and then as soon as there's a brief moment you go ahead and reload your weapon even though you're not necessarily at your last round or anything, that will make those go quicker and easier. So overall, that's a very good effect on this weapon, but because the first two effects aren't particularly exciting, I'm going to go ahead and call this one not great and move on to the next one. And here we get a medic submachine gun with bullets exploding for area damage and faster movement speed while aiming. So the medic's effect is an interesting effect. If you're in a group, especially if you're a bloodied group, then it can actually do quite a bit of work to keep you alive as long as you're all, you know, within a certain range of each other. If you're all actually playing together, you know, if you're all spread out across the map, it's not going to do anything for you. The healing from one instance of the medic's effect is actually quite a bit higher than the vampire's effect. So, you know, if you trigger the medic's effect one time to get some healing, you're going to get a lot more healing than if you trigger the vampire's effect for healing one time. But it's also not as common, you know, with a vampire's weapon, you're going to be triggering it with every single time you hit the enemy with it. The medic's effect only happens when you're actually critting. Although that said, if you're spec'd for critting, you can crit pretty frequently, so you can play a bit of a combat medic role with VATS and a weapon like this. Ideally, you do want something fully automatic like this so that you can really smash out those criticals and keep the health flowing if you're going to be trying to do something like that. So this is an interesting weapon like this. I don't see where too many players would use that as their main plan, but it is definitely an option. The second effect, the bullets exploding for area damage, well, that's just one of the best secondary effects in the game because it just basically adds extra damage, and extra damage is always a good thing. Damage really is king in this game. So that's great, and it's not a whole lot more to say about that. The faster movement speed while aiming, that one is not really doing anything for you to the best of my knowledge at all if you have the Speed Demon mutation. If you don't, then it is going to do what it says. It's going to give you a little bit of faster movement speed while you're aiming. I just don't see a lot of players running around the battlefield while constantly aiming. So even if you don't have the Speed Demon mutation, I don't think that effect is really doing a whole lot for you. But this one could be kind of an interesting weapon overall if you were wanting to play some sort of a support build. So with that in mind, it's kind of interesting. Let's go on ahead and move on to the next one. And here we have an anti-armor Fat Man with plus 25% damage while aiming and plus 1 agility. So the Fat Man is definitely not the kind of weapon that you're going to see most players running around with as their main weapon, simply because the ammo for it is just so heavy. And even with some weight reduction perks, you're still going to have a lot of your inventory space taken up if you're trying to do something like that. But it can be fun to run around with and blow things up once in a while. You know, there's definitely some satisfaction to be had in that. And the anti-armor effect on it is going to help you kill things in one shot even more frequently, which the Fat Man and other explosive weapons do tend to be a bit what's the best word? Unreliable in the damage that they do. Sometimes they'll kill things in one shot, sometimes they'll just barely damage them, and you won't really understand why the difference, because the shot hit pretty much is just as close. So, you know, it's not the most reliable of weapons, but that anti-armor effect will help you get some more damage and more of those kills and keep you having some fun with it. The plus 25% damage while aiming, that's also a good effect, because you can go ahead and aim your Fat Man, fire it, and get another 25% damage, which, if you look at the damage card, that's going to be a pretty significant boost to damage right there, so has another chance of getting you some more of those one-hit kills. So overall, that's not bad either. And then the plus 1 agility, that's not really going to do a whole lot for you here. You know, it gives you some more AP for either VATS or for sprinting or whatever, but not really going to come into play, I don't think, a whole lot with this weapon. But then again, you know, you never complain about an extra point of agility. So overall, those are very good effects on this weapon, just not really the ideal weapon for them. So let's go on ahead and move on to the next one. And here we've got a 2-shot Broadsider with replenishing action points with each kill and 90% reduced weight. So the 2-shot effect is interesting. It adds 25% damage to the weapon, but that total damage, 125%, is divided up between 2 shots. So you actually, in some cases, with really heavily armored enemies, you can actually end up doing some less damage that way, just because each one of those shots is going to trigger the enemy's armor independently, which is unfortunate. As a further drawback with the 2-shot, it also significantly decreases the accuracy of the weapon, unfortunately. So overall, I'm not a big fan of the 2-shot effect, but one place where it does shine is with explosive weapons, because each of the 2 shots will give the full explosion. Well, that's my understanding of why that works like that anyway. Perhaps I'm wrong, but the effect is that 2-shot does work very well with explosive weapons, which includes the Broadsider. So this could be an interesting weapon to run around and play with, you know, mostly for if you just get your hands on some cannonballs and would rather shoot them at something as opposed to just dropping them. And the 90% reduced weight actually works very well with that too, because it's not going to take up a whole lot of space in your inventory, so you can keep it around just for that purpose. The replenishing action points with each kill, that's a good effect, but I don't know that you're really going to get as much out of it as you would with some other weapons on this one, just because even if you are using VATS, you're going to have a small ammo capacity, and if you drop out of VATS while you're reloading, then you're going to be regenerating your AP while you're reloading. So if you've got a half-decent supply of AP and AP regen, then it's probably just not going to do a whole lot for you. On the other hand, if you don't, it really could keep you going in VATS for a while. So, you know, it depends on what kind of gear you've got and how you're built. So overall, this one is interesting, but I'm not sure it's all that great. Let's go on ahead and move on to the next one. And here we have a Troubleshooters short ultrasight laser pistol with bashing damage increased by 15% and your VATS critical meter filling 15% faster. So the Troubleshooters effect is one of the Slayer's effects, and it's probably one of the more useful of the Slayer's effects, simply because there are numerous places where you can expect to be finding robots on a regular basis, whether it's the nuke silos, the encrypted event, or a daily ops or whatever. So that's a good thing, and robots are not the squishiest enemies out there, so that extra plus 50% damage to them, that matters. The Ultrasight laser pistol, unfortunately, is just straight worse than the regular laser pistol, and that goes for the ultrasight laser rifle versus the regular laser rifle. They're the same weapon, just different mods. That's not the case with the ultrasight Gatling laser versus the Gatling laser, but that's a different topic. So, unfortunately, even though this one has a decent first effect for at least some utility, the fact that it's on an ultrasight laser pistol, and laser pistols are not that great to begin with, leaves something to be desired. The second effect, the bashing damage increased by 50%, well, I talked about that earlier. This is not a minigun, so it's really not doing anything for you here either. The VATS critical meter filling 15% faster, that is a good effect, especially if you are trying to smash out those criticals to get as much extra damage as you can. Having that critical meter fill 15% faster, well, that'll get you more criticals and more damage, so that's a good thing. Overall, though, this one's not particularly great either. Let's go on ahead and move on to the next one. And here we've got a Ghoul Slayer's auto grenade launcher with bashing damage increased by 50% again and 90% reduced weight. So the Ghoul Slayer's effect is another one of the Slayer's effects, and it's probably one of the less useful ones. Not because there's not times when you would be fighting ghouls. There's plenty of cases for that. The White Spring, some daily ops you'll find some ghouls. You might go hunt in the Charleston Capitol building or whatever. But it's just that ghouls are already squishy enough that you can generally kill them pretty quickly and easily with a non-legendary weapon, so that plus 50% damage specifically aimed at ghouls isn't really doing a whole lot for you in that situation and doing nothing for you against anything other than ghouls. So definitely not the most desirable of first stars. And bashing damage again, well, we've talked about that. This is not a minigun, so we're going to move on. The 90% reduced weight, that is actually useful, in my opinion, on a weapon like this. It's actually probably one of the better third stars for this particular type of a weapon, the grenade launcher, just because you're probably not going to use the grenade launcher as your primary farming weapon. But it could be fun to keep around, and, you know, when you get yourself a stack, like I've got 26 40mm grenades, go on ahead and shoot them at things. So having the 90% reduced weight to have it not take up a ton of space in your inventory when it's not being used is a good thing. But overall, this one, not great because of the first two effects. So let's go on ahead and move on to the next one. And here we've got a Mutants Pistol with bullets exploding for area damage and plus 50 damage resistance while aiming. So the Mutants effect, it got a buff back when all of the legendary effects got a rebalance several months back, several patches back at this point. And it went from being just a base 10% damage bonus if you were mutated to plus 5% damage bonus per mutation up to a maximum of 5 total mutations for 25%. That's not particularly great when you compare it to the potential 50% of junkies or aristocrats or even higher with bloodied. But at the same time, unlike those other effects, most high-level players are likely to be running 5 mutations, so you're not really giving up anything at all for that increase in damage if you are already running those mutations. The bullets exploding for area damage, well, I talked about that. That is a good effect. It's just extra damage. It doesn't have the range you might think it would, so you're not as often as you would expect going to be doing damage to nearby enemies. They have to be pretty close, but it does happen, and regardless, it does extra damage to your primary target, so that's always a good thing. And then the plus 50 damage resistance while aiming, well, that makes this weapon into a weapon that you would really prefer to aim, generally speaking, which is not a bad thing, although with pistols, they tend to be a bit underpowered, so you typically want to use VATS to try to get a little bit of extra oomph out of them, you know, some extra damage from those crits. But at the same time, there's nothing that says that you have to do it that way, and getting some extra damage resistance while you're aiming, well, if you're the type of player who likes to aim, then that's not a bad thing. It is important to keep in mind that if you've got over 300 to 400 damage resistance on your armor already, then you will see some diminishing returns on how much damage resistance is helping you, but it will still help you to some extent at least. So overall, this one I could see actually a mid-level player using until they got something better. It could be modded out as a rifle or a pistol, you know, fully automatic, semi-automatic, whatever. So it's not the worst roll, definitely not the best. Let's go ahead and move on to the next one. And here we've got a Suppressor's Black Powder Pistol with replenishing action points with each kill and 90% reduced weight. So we talked about the Suppressor's effect before, And pretty much everything I said there applies here, except that this is really not the kind of weapon you would want the suppressor's effect on. This is the kind of weapon that you really want to be killing things with one shot for it to be useful. I am aware that there's a glitch that you can load up a whole bunch of ammo in it and use it like a semi-automatic weapon for high damage, but I don't endorse doing that. I don't do things like that myself, so that's not how I would use it. And so if I was going to try to use a weapon like this, the only viable way I could see using it would be to try to go for those one-shot kills as often as possible, and suppressors is not going to help me get those. Replenishing action points with each kill is a good effect, but I think it's lost on here because you're going to have to reload between every shot. So if you drop out of VATS to reload, then your AP is going to be regenerating while you're reloading, and the reload is rather long on these black powder weapons. So there's a good chance that if you've got half decent AP regen, your AP will be fully replenished by the time you are back, by the time you're reloaded and ready to fire again. So if that's the case, then this is not going to do a whole lot for you. The 90% reduced weight is probably the best effect on this weapon, but overall, I really don't see anybody running around with a weapon like this just for, especially for with the suppressor's effect, but even for, typically legitimate reasons. So overall, I'm going to call this one a dud and move on to the next one. And here we've got a Goremand short radium rifle with VATS critical hits doing plus 50% damage and breaking 50% slower. So the Gormand's effect is one of the newer effects, and the way it works is you get up to plus 12% damage for your thirst meter being full, and another plus 12% damage maximum for your health, hunger meter being full. So if both are full, then you're going to get a plus 24% damage, which is very comparable to mutants and some of the others. It's a bit low in my opinion, but that's not terrible. The real drawback with Gourmands is that no matter how diligent you are with keeping your character well fed and well hydrated, those bars are going to decrease, especially if you're using speed demons. So that increase in damage is just going to go down over time. You can use things like perfect bubblegum and, popcorn, regular bubblegum, things like that to help you keep that under control, but really, it just doesn't feel worth it to me. If the bonus was much higher at the top end and then diminished, it would feel a whole lot better overall, in my opinion. The VATS critical hits doing plus 50% damage, that is one of my favorite effects in the game. So one thing to keep in mind with the VATS critical damage is that on endgame bosses, they are very effective, such as the Scorch Beast Queen and Earl. It bypasses their 70% or whatever damage reduction right off the top. So you can get some very high damage by spamming critical hits. And that VATS critical hits doing plus 50% damage effect is just going to drive that even higher. So that's a very, very good effect. And even in daily farming, it's not a terrible effect. Not necessarily the best, but it's not bad by any means. The breaks 50% slower effect, well, that's also a great effect for pretty much any weapon, really, just because, really, who likes repairing their weapons? I don't think anybody does, and I'm of the opinion that Bethesda could have simply left that out of the game altogether, and they would not have gotten any complaints about that. So, overall, this one is fairly mediocre. I could see somebody having some interest in it. I might put it up on my vendor for cheap just to see if anybody wants to try and have some fun with it. But overall, it's pretty much on the lower end of mediocre. So we got one more try here. Let's go on ahead and see what we get. And here we've got an AntiArmor Bow with VATS critical hits doing plus 50% damage and plus 50 damage resistance while reloading. So the bow is kind of like the black powder weapons in that you really want to be getting those one-shot kills to make it useful. Its reload is not as slow as the black powder weapons, so it's a little more useful in that regard. Also, it's completely silent, unlike the black powder weapons, so you can use it from stealth. Both of those things do make it a bit more useful than the black powder weapons, in my opinion. Putting anti-armor on it, that actually helps because that's going to get you more damage and get you a much better chance of getting those one-shot kills. The VATS critical hit's doing plus 50% damage. Well, I talked about that on the last effect, and everything that's on the last weapon, and everything that I said there pretty much applies here, and it's just going to help you get some extra damage. If you're using this in VATS, then that's going to do a lot for you. Unfortunately, the third effect does not synergize with the second effect, the 50 damage resistance while aiming, because it's basically going to force you to choose between getting some extra crit damage from VATS or some extra damage resistance while you're aiming. Overall, I would normally go with the VATS choice on this weapon because chances are if you're using a bow, you're going to be trying to be stealthy, so the extra damage resistance while you're aiming is not going to be doing nearly as much for you as the extra damage from the crits. But, you know, situations vary, playstyles vary, so your mileage may vary. But overall, this is an interesting weapon. Not great, but it's at least something that I could see getting some use out of in some situations. So, once again, we didn't get anything especially good. We did get a couple of duds, but we'll try again next week. One of these times, I'm sure we'll get something good. Until then, I'll talk to you soon.